Welcome back to the Lore and Valor podcast. Joining me today is Monalisa Foster, my friend and fellow author of many years now, actually. She is the author of the Ravages of Honor space opera series, volumes one and two of which, Conquest and Ascension, are both out. I've read both of those books. I actually had the pleasure to alpha or beta for each of those, and they're both fantastic. I highly recommend them. Monalisa, thank you for coming to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for doing all the alpha and beta reading and stuff. Because
It was a pleasure. It was real fun back and forth and educational. We have a topic today, but I want to say just as a start, one of the reasons you were on the short list of people I wanted to get on the channel as fast as possible is no one pays as much attention to the craft of story as you do, that I know. I know there are many people who take our craft very seriously, but in our social circle, I do not know anyone else who takes getting this stuff right as seriously as you do, including myself, to be honest. I take it seriously, but I respect and value your opinion a great deal, and I enjoy reading your work because it
thank
always
you.
leads to as many interesting debates as it does as many interesting agreements.
Yeah, I mean, it's just something I care about very deeply is the art and craft of storytelling and story itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yeah, it
that
shows.
comes, and it's just going to color everything that, you know. Unfortunately, I've lost that ability to just kind of enjoy things. But well, okay. I mean, it's a small price to pay, right?
Yeah, no, I definitely feel that, and that's why this is a great segue. We're here today to talk about the Netflix streaming series Shadow and Bone, and the only reason that I ended up watching, and aside from the fact that I do like fantasy and science fiction properties in general, but the only reason I gave this one a chance is because you gave it a good review. So, and I do that. I'm like, oh well, if Mona Lisa actually likes something, well, I'll at least give it a try, even if the marketing put me off a little bit on it. So we are
So
here to talk.
What put you off?
It just feels so. This is kind of spoilery for the review, but from the casting and the tone, it felt a little YA to me, like young adult to me. And there's nothing wrong with YA. There's nothing inherently wrong with YA, I should say. But I feel like the market's been saturated with it in recent years, and furthermore, I know I'm a little younger than you, but when the entire cast looks very bright and shiny and about 19, sometimes I'm like, I don't know if this is gonna get me. Like obviously it's fine to have a young protagonist. I know that's actually the default, but just from the just the trailers and stuff on Netflix, it looked a lot more. I don't want to say vapid because that's unfair. That's too harsh. But it looked a little more in the line of something like Divergent or Hunger Games, but in fantasy Eastern Europe, or a pastiche of fantasy Eastern Europe. I don't actually think it has the trappings of Eastern Europe. I don't think it goes deep into Eastern European lore the way that the Witcher books do. The series, not so much.
No, I agree with you, and I had some of the same reservations. Because so I'm past having teenagers. I know you're just going into that phase of having
Stepping
teenagers.
into that world, yeah.
Yeah. I'm going out of that phase, and there were years, very many years, where the last thing I wanted was anything having to do with teenagers, in real life or in story.
Yeah.
And that was my reservation about it initially as well. And to be honest with you, the thing that drew me in was kind of that Eastern European flavor that they were, because I'm not that much into fantasy. I'm more of a science fiction person. Rick is the one that's actually the fantasy person in the house. I know we're switched. Usually it's the other way around.
Something about a physics degree. I don't know. Like,
yeah, that nasty physics degree. It's just ew.
To be clear, that's the physics degree Mona Lisa has for our viewers. Just to be clear.
Yes, Mona Lisa knows math really good. Yeah, so no, I had the same impression. I was afraid it was going to be another the one, and that trope is a big part of it. And I think it's getting a little worn. Everything from Harry Potter to Divergent to Hunger Games, it's always about the one, right?
Yeah.
It's all
Yeah.
superheroes. Um, but this really surprised me because I approached it kind of with all of these reservations, and I was just hooked fairly quickly. And it was just overall very well done.
Mhm.
So I mean, go ahead. I mean, where
Yeah,
do you
yeah,
want to?
no. So I'd say I enjoyed it a lot too. And before we started recording, I said that even if I were not doing this YouTube series with you about the show, I would probably keep watching because I'm definitely interested enough to see what happens. So when we're coming into this show, I found it funny. This sort of thing bothers me less than it bothers you, I think, usually, or maybe I'm misunderstanding why it bothers you. So I want to give you a chance to rebut this. But it starts with voiceover. It starts with I'm adapting a book and I can't express this through character facial expression, acting, or dialogue. So I'm just going to give you a voiceover with exposition. And I was like, oh, I thought Mona Lisa hated this kind of stuff. I'm used to it from 70s and 80s fantasy movie and 90s fantasy movies, even though I recognize it's maybe a little ham-fisted sometimes. So I'm wondering when you first heard that, was that something you had to overcome, or did it not bother you watching it first off?
So the problem is initially really with prologues, not so much with voiceovers. There's plenty of stuff where voiceovers are done well. So like in
Mhm.
Outlander, Claire gives us voiceovers all the time. Um, it's not head hopping where we get everybody's voiceover.
Mhm.
So we have three or four voiceovers going.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Unlike where
Yeah.
Elephant in the Room is Dune 1984, which I still kind of love, even though I recognize it's massively flawed.
Oh no, I like that movie too. I own it on DVD. That's
Yeah.
really the biggest compliment I can give something. But it's I also recognize that craft wise there were issues.
Yeah, you
Um,
shouldn't do that in a movie. Like
but this so usually the reason I'm critical of prologues is because what
Mhm,
tends to happen is that a writer goes out and gets a bunch of beta readers, and the beta readers come back and says I didn't understand this and I didn't understand that, and so they have a list.
mhm,
So rather than go back and do the necessary world building or rewriting everything, and sometimes it's extensive rewrites that would be required, they package it all up in an info dump as a
mhm,
prologue.
hmm.
And this is why prologues have a bad rap. Prologues
Yeah.
are supposed to be a hook. So when you have a prologue in a chapter one, you're supposed to have two hooks. And
Mm,
what sets the prologue separate from the main narrative is that it's from a viewpoint or that's different. That doesn't occur again, except maybe in an epilogue. That's what I did with Catching the Dark. We
mhm.
get
Yes.
uh, a different viewpoint for the prologue and the epilogue because the main narrative is by someone else.
Yeah.
And then
And it works very well, by the way. That is my favorite piece of your short fiction.
that's awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Um, or there's a time jump. So a
Yeah.
prologue allows you to do a time jump, and that's what we have, right? She comes in with this voiceover from when she was a child, and I think that's why it didn't bother me because it wasn't there as a band-aid for bad writing.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. So I thought it was maybe a little. So from my view, I wasn't like rolling my eyes in disgust, but like being critical, knowing I was going to come online and talk about this episode as opposed to just sitting back and completely relaxing. I did feel like maybe it was a bit of an obvious expository lump that maybe could have been spread out and over the episode and left until, oh, now we need to know that so it comes up naturally in dialogue or is communicated visually or however you do it. Obviously, filmmakers and TV production teams have different tools than we do as writers to communicate that sort of thing. But it didn't. Again, it was that's a minor criticism because I understand, when you're doing especially fantasy world building, and far future space opera, I think is fair to say as well. When the setting is super alien compared to what we know, obviously you have to communicate that information quickly. Um, Yeah, I feel like that's a minor tick against it for me. That it's like, I don't know that you needed to tell us all that right away. You could have just shown her in action being herself. All the bigotry she experiences and everything would have communicated to us her status in life. But then again, I tend to try to trust my reader and my audience a little more than some. Some people are very deathly afraid of being misunderstood by the
Right.
people consuming their fiction. So again, I I spent a lot of words on something that didn't bother me that much, but just as a note that it did stand out to me of like, oh yes, no, that was a lot of information you told me. Okay, got it.
I think one of the reasons that, or when it does work, other than it
Mhm.
not being a band-aid for, oh, I don't want to go back and rewrite and world build, is what one of the things that they did get right with it was that it was emotion and stakes
Yeah,
right away. It
yeah.
wasn't just there, it's the year 10,000 of the Padishah Emperor, whatever. Okay. I think the only thing, so we learned a bunch of names and a bunch, so in that one we learned a bunch of names and a bunch of
Yeah.
terms that nobody knows, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that's like, splash of cold water.
No, you're absolutely correct because it is all of it in that opening monologue speaks directly to her motivation
Mhm.
and what's driving her and what her problem is and what we're going to be. I assume I've only seen episode one, but I'm assuming we're going to be dealing with these issues for her for the duration of at least season one. Um, in
Right.
terms of her lack of her inability to fit in due to her mixed heritage, um, and the fact that everybody views her as having been as being from the enemy nation that's across the fold, I guess, or is it on the? So guess I should say for those who haven't. Oh, sorry, I forgot to do this. Spoiler warning: if you've not seen episode one of Shadow and Bone, sorry, I do that on all my YouTube videos when I talk about streaming shows. We are going to spoil this episode. We're going to try to avoid spoilers for later episodes. But if you've not seen episode one of Shadow and Bone and you want to, go watch it because we're going to talk about all the various plot elements and what happens within this episode. So the great big bad geographical fantasy feature of this universe seems to be the fold, this big dark shadowy mass that's very hard but not impossible to transit. And one thing I didn't quite understand watching the episode all the way through, but not having looked up any Wikipedia articles or looked up any reference material, is the war that their country is in. Is it with another country that's on their side of the fold, or are they at war with uh, where Ketterdam is across the fold, where we see the B plot? Like, I wasn't clear about that.
I'm actually not clear on it either,
Okay.
and I probably should be. So the shoe, which I think is their China equivalent or Asia equivalent,
Hmm.
is the enemy, and
Yeah.
she is supposed to
Okay.
be half shoe. But
Gotcha.
I don't remember that in the book.
Okay.
So I
Okay.
don't know if this is something that did differently in the movie or not. If
Hmm.
it was in the book, it didn't make enough of an impression on me. Okay. Now, I am at that point in life where things go in one ear and come out the other all day.
Yeah.
So they may have dealt with it in the book. I don't know. Ketterdam, I think, is like more like Germany or
Gotcha.
Norway or something like that. And
Mhm.
then the country that she's part of is split by the fold.
Oh, gotcha. So they're actually like that the fold runs through the middle of that country. It's not like
Mhm.
she crosses the fold to get to a different country.
That
Got
was
it.
my understanding. It was East Ravka and Ravka are divided by
Oh,
the fold.
that's in the monologue. That's in the opening monologue, isn't
I
it?
think so.
Okay, I
And I
think you're
think
right.
there's some separatist, I wanna, like, separatist tendencies of some people that are on the other side of the fold wanting to break away from, the main part of the country. So there's politics.
Yeah. And I get it that like that doesn't since this is character focused and um I get the impression that the romantic subplot, if it's not fantasy romance, it is one with a very strong undertones of fantasy subplots and will they, won't they? With Mal, our the first male protagonist we meet, and the heroine, the actual protagonist of the show, Lena. Um, and I've seen enough marketing material to know that there's at least one third option for Lena, from what I've seen of the trailers. So I understand that the geopolitics doesn't necessarily have to be the most well calculated in the world, but and it doesn't really bother me that I don't know that stuff, but my brain works that I'm going to try to figure it out when I'm watching a show. I'm going to try to be like, okay, so wait a minute, what are they fighting over, and where and who, and I'm just going to want to. It's going to bother me if I don't know, so I'll try to figure that out as we keep watching. Um, but yeah, so that was interesting. So we talked about the voiceover. One thing I will say from a casting perspective, and this is another thing that's a little nitpicky, but I'm like, they establish early on in the show, maybe in the first third, that they're experiencing food shortages in both society at large and the army. They all, and I get it's like you only have so many actors to choose from, and they can't all be Christian Bale and starve themselves. But I'm like, they all look really well muscled and fed for people experiencing a food shortage, and they're all really pretty and clean for an
And
army
they all
that's
have
been
their
back to
teeth.
the field. What's that?
And they all have their teeth.
And they
Um,
all have their teeth, and they all have makeup, and they all have hair product, and yeah, and this is, I mean, this is hardly the only show that violates that, but
yeah.
it is a little clear, it's like you all look like you stepped off the set of a music video. I'm just saying.
I think the only show where I saw, a lot of, missing teeth and people that looked like they were having a hard time was, Spartacus.
Hmm. And not
That
even
was the
then, right? Yeah, not everyone, which not everyone would be, but yeah, you're
no,
right.
but, like, people in the crowd,
Hmm.
at the gladiator games,
Hmm.
you could actually what I was doing is I was watching I like the outtakes, and,
Hmm.
they were showing, people putting their teeth back in and their glasses on, putting
Hmm.
their glasses back on. So, it was one of those things that, stuck with me, I guess.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Ancient and pre-industrial. Well, I mean, I don't have to say ancient, just pre-industrial dentistry was
Yes.
not something to be envied. But yeah, no, again, like that's again another minor dig. But because he made such a big deal of, it's like, oh, we'll finally have food. It's like, where the hell did those pecs come from if he's not getting protein? I'm just saying. Like, so we go through and we're actually introduced to Mal in the middle of a boxing match in his unit, which is cool, to establish. Or wait, do we see the boxing match before the flashback or the flashback before the boxing match? I can't remember
Which
at this point.
flashback?
The flashback to their orphanage time where he's running away
I wanna
from
say
the.
that we get the boxing match before,
Okay, cool. Yeah.
and you would think I would know better since I rewatched it just for this.
I watched it yesterday and I can't remember. I remember there was a boxing match and the flashback to their time as children in the orphanage in proximity to each other, but I can't remember which one came first. Regardless, his introduction in the here and now as a grown man is in the boxing match where he does well because he's one of the heroes, I presume. I don't know. Maybe he'll get killed in the next episode and completely subvert my expectations.
No.
Um, yeah, so does well in the boxing match, but then we flash back and um, I wasn't. I think I'm okay with it, but it was interesting that they established that as a boy, he was very much more timid, much more prone to run from a fight. Lena has to stand up for him and threaten to knife a kid who's bullying them.
Mhm.
Um, and it's the crusty but kindly headmistress of the orphanage, which is a perfectly valid trope. Some things are a trope because they work. Who tells him, she says, you can't run away forever. He says, yes, I can. All right, yes, you can. But this is the kind of boy you'll grow up into, is the one who runs away from a fight. And I was surprised that they allowed. Sometimes I'm shocked that a moral as old school and unreconstructed as that is even allowed to exist in modern entertainment, because I agree with that moral, but I'm surprised again that it's allowed to be like, oh no, this is how you should feel about things. Like you should be ashamed to run from a fight, and it's like, oh, you can say that? Okay, cool. Good job, guys.
Ana Cunha, who is the headmistress at the orphanage, is one of my
Hmm.
favorite characters.
I can see
Um,
that.
and you understand why. Um, and I mean, my hat's off to the woman. I mean, whatever she was doing to raise these kids, she did a very, very good job.
Yeah.
And it's little. I think we get little bits of wisdom like that throughout.
Mhm.
Um, and so she is actually one of my favorite characters.
Yeah. I can totally see that. I can totally see that. So Mal wins his boxing match, but then one of the airbenders is acting like a dick to him,
The
because
squallers.
yeah, squallers. Yeah. Now is squalor just air magicians? Are there different ones for each element, or?
They are the air magicians. They're the ones that basically the bend air, make wind
Mhm.
happen, and so on. And then
Gotcha.
the inferni are the fire, like the firebenders, basically.
Gotcha.
And I don't
Yeah.
know if they have water ones. If they do, I'm not aware. At
We
least not
haven't met
yet.
him yet. Yeah.
I have not met them yet. Yeah.
Yeah. And we'll get into other types of magic too when we get to the B plot and Ketterdam, but those are the two that seem to be available in the Ravikan army, is firebenders and airbenders so far,
Yeah.
Inferni and Squallers, who apparently are, that they establish very well because the Squaller comes in and challenges Mal to fight him fists to magic. So it's pretty clear there's a very large social divide between the two, that there's no sense of fair play from magician to peasant, it feels like, from that exchange.
Yes, and I think they also have, I guess, the other kind of the other kind of magics have to do with people who are either healers or heart
Hmm.
renders. So
Yeah.
they can actually burst your heart
Hmm.
from a distance.
That seems like that would solve a lot of problems if you're in combat.
Yes, yes. It's actually, I think I like. I mean, it would be a very useful skill, especially in war. I'm
Yeah,
surprised
yeah,
they don't just send them out to
yeah.
fight the war for them. I guess, but there's probably not enough of them or something like that.
Yeah, limited resource. I always tend to think of that as like something you use. It's like your fine china. You only bring it out for special occasions. And a bit of a tangent. I always liked, in Babylon 5, since they had telepathy as
Hmm.
a thing, psionic powers, and at one point, they're realizing how useful telepathy can be in space combat because the range is much further than originally thought. And the telepathic character, when asked, he's like, "Well, why didn't we know about this during the war?" He's like, "Yeah, we lied to you about it. Like we didn't like my telepaths aren't expendable. I didn't want them on warships." So I kind of like that Machiavellian. Like, there's an explanation. It's because they were preserving themselves at the cost of
I think
others.
you have a I think you have a similar dynamic here with the leader, the Darkling, and
Hmm.
him being the general for the second
Hmm.
army. So the regular people are the first army, and the people that can
Hmm.
use magic are the second army. And
Hmm.
he definitely has his own little power base that he's developing, just like Bester was
Yeah.
in Babylon 5.
Yes.
So he's kind
Yeah.
of our Bester character in a lot of ways.
Okay. Okay. That's high praise. Bester is one of my favorite villains ever. But because he's so clearly a villain, but so clearly human too.
Hmm.
That it's like, okay, no, Bester's evil, but his motivations all check out. Not that you should approve of him, but his motivations do make sense. Like, given who he is, I can believe that's what he would do, and not see himself as just a Nazi or anything. But
Hmm.
we're not talking about Babylon 5. We should get on and talk about Babylon 5 at some point in its own right, because it's my favorite show ever. Um, okay, so we have a supply mission across the fold, apparently to the other Ravka, which I did not fully understand, because apparently I wasn't paying close enough attention. Bad, Justin. So we have the supply mission across the fold, which, the actors and the writing do a good job communicating, is a big, scary, likely to get you killed kind of mission. And naturally, Mal gets selected for it, and Lena doesn't, and we can tell right away that Lena is just totally going to accept that, and nothing's going to happen to further the plot when she reacts to that. But before we get a chance to see her complying with her orders, and going along with the plan without resistance, this is when we cut to the subplot, the B plot in Ketterdam. So
Hmm.
you have the casino owner thief, the
Yes.
gunslinger, and what is gosh, what's her name?
Inej.
Inej, yeah.
She's a very interesting character because I'm still trying to figure out her background
Yeah.
because I'm wondering how did a girl who was taken at 14
Mhm.
become this highly trained knife wielding assassin? You know,
It
how
it
did they
is
even
curious.
take from her parents if she could already do all this stuff?
Yeah.
So I'm very
And if
curious about her.
yeah, and how did they take her alive if she was that effective of a fighter, right? I mean, I guess you could, but then if they did manage to take her alive with all her skills, how does she end up in possession of a criminal, even a talented and somewhat um, affluent criminal, as we're dealing with this casino owner thief in Ketterdam? Um, I found their
I guess
dynamic.
she's an indenture. She's an indenture that gets rented out.
Yes, yes, but how do you control that kind of person? Like, and like,
Yeah.
it's like clearly, like, it was communicated, I thought, well enough with dialogue and acting that, like, she does want to work for this guy, even though their relationship is, there is, and the relationship is indentured servitude. There seems to be personal loyalty at stake too,
Mhm.
between them, and that he overtly states that he's like, no, I'm buying out your indenture, and you'll be. I think the implication is she'll be free after he's done, buying out her indentured servitude, and he's offended by the idea that she's a slave to him because she implies something like that. I think that's the way I read the scene anyway. And that's another thing I found interesting, is that they're allowing a um a cordial relationship between slave and master in a show these days. It's another thing that I was like, oh, okay, well, surprised that'll pass, but good. I mean, cool. Let's see more. Um,
Lee Bardugo gets away with a lot of stuff that
mhm,
we just don't see anymore. I mean, Alina is not the fastest, strongest, most badass person of every room that she walks in. This is one of the reasons I like this show. She is not the quote unquote strong female character
mhm.
that we have come to hate and hate and hate some more. Uh, because if anything, she has nothing, right? So she's an orphan. Mal has all the skills.
Mhm,
Initially she is nothing. She's the least talented, least important person there, and the book actually does a much better job of emphasizing just how uh, how small she is as compared to everybody else. She is
mhm,
physically smaller, she is physically weaker, she's slow, she doesn't have survival skills, she doesn't have hunting skills, she doesn't have gathering skills. It
mm,
seems she's just a failure at everything. She is sickly.
mm,
Um, and so it's not as strong in the show,
mhm.
but again, this is quite different from what we have come to see with these quote unquote strong female characters, and I think that
Yeah,
she's better for it because now she has something to fight for.
yeah. She has to achieve things rather than being handed them.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, that's
And
interesting. And
that's
is cartography a thing in the book as well? Is that her thing in the book as well as the show, or is that an invention of the show?
I think it is. It's not huge.
Mm,
I think there's just some things that are visually better done in the show.
mhm.
Rather it's like the strategy thing with the politics because she's the only viewpoint character in
Yeah,
the book. We get her viewpoint, which is very limited. We don't get the general's planning.
gotcha.
We don't get the people in power planning.
Mhm. Yeah,
So it's kind of the same
mhm,
here, the same
mhm.
thing.
Gotcha. Um, so yeah, no, that's interesting. And oh, about the so I found it interesting that with the criminal crew back in Ketterdam, the B plot. Um, I don't know. Are you a huge Sanderson? I don't know if you've read much Brandon Sanderson or not. You said you're not a fantasy reader by nature, so probably not.
If I read anything from him or by him, it's been so long that I don't remember.
Yeah.
It's those things that's still on my list of things to do, but yeah, I just,
Yeah.
gotta create more time.
No, I hear you. There, I mean, we're at the point. I'm sure you're in the similar situation where, like, close friends that I genuinely care about have put out books that I have not read yet. That it's like these are Casey Azell's very dear friend. I have not read all her books. Have not done it. I would like to. She's a great author, but I haven't gotten around to it.
Well, I mean, now I know a couple of hundred writers at least. I would be
Yeah,
doing nothing but reading their stuff,
yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly.
And you're in the same boat.
Yeah, exactly. You learn very quickly not to be hurt if your friends haven't read your books when you're a writer. Um, but so anyway, not that either of us is friends with Brandon Sanderson. We don't know him from Adam, but uh, I did read. I'm not like a huge Sanderson fanatic, but I like his stuff that I've read. And the B plot in Ketterdam reminds me very strongly of Mistborn. So, viewer, if you like Sanderson and Mistborn and the fantasy criminal crew underworld type vibe, I think that B plot is going to appeal to people who are looking for that. And you said that is so. Is that cut whole for the show? Because you said the book earlier. You said the book is just Lena's point of view, and we don't detach from her at any point. So is that
So
whole crew made up for the series?
I
Or
believe that it's another book.
okay, they
I
pulled
want
elements from another novel in the series.
Yeah, so what they did in the series is they synced up timelines,
Mm, hmm.
but the books are sequential.
Gotcha,
I
gotcha.
at least that's my impression of what they did because, the first book was entirely except for the prologue, which was an omniscient,
Hmm.
the book was first person, and it was all Alina.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, no, I thought it was interesting. I do want to see more of that subplot, and I also found it interesting that it seems like I can never remember the character's name, the head dude of the gang who owns the casino, uh,
Kaz,
redheaded dude, Kaz, is that his name?
the good guy, the one with the
I mean,
cane, the one with the
yeah,
cane,
the yeah, the one
Kaz.
I only buy one of a kind things guy.
Yes,
Yeah, okay, Kaz.
Kaz.
I'll try to remember that. So it was interesting to me that Kaz, um, he's very enthusiastic. I'm sorry, let me back up a little bit. So I wrote down her name. Injesh,
Inej,
Inej. Thank you, Inej.
Inej.
God, I'm gonna get canceled so hard. Inej, Inej comes to report back to Kaz with a rumor of a job offer that's going to go across the fold and pay 1,000,000 Krug, which is the currency domination of this kingdom, I'm sure, or this realm. I'm sure. I don't know what form of government they are. And he's just really obsessed with getting this mission. And I get the impression it's not because of the money, per se, that it has something to do with getting across the fold. I'm guessing, but I don't know. So I'm really interested to see how that plays out and why he's so intent on getting that contract, and what his motivations are. Because while he does seem like a good guy, um, they live in a flawed world and they are tolerating some pretty dark crap. Um, so I guess we can talk about it now. So that subplot in this episode, I think it ends with um, well, no, that's jumping ahead. So the rumor is that one of the details that comes out is they don't need to just apply for the job; they need to bring the Heartrender you mentioned earlier as one of the magicians, and they go through this whole rigmarole to find him, and then you're very flagrantly faced with the fact that they're working for someone who is not a good person, even remotely.
I think that one of the things that, Bardugo does really well is, the way that she pairs the characters. So your hero and your villain are 2 sides of the same coin,
Hmm.
and she does this with Kaz.
Hmm.
So he is the good side of the other coin, so the other plot line, and we see him contrasted by the people that he goes up against, the people who are actually breaking knees for no reason,
Yeah,
uh,
or just
and
for gain, just for personal gain. Yeah.
right. He's a
Hmm.
very, very complicated character.
Hmm.
And even though I watched the whole series when it first came out, I think I've actually watched it all the way through twice now.
Okay.
I I don't exactly remember what his motivations are, and I don't know. I don't remember if that's just because my brain is, fizzled, or if they just don't reveal it. It's one of those
Okay.
things that you're supposed to find out.
Mhm.
And um, when they kind of cheated a little bit on the timelines. They're not quite parallel because the person that escapes the skiff in the
Mhm.
fold is
Yeah.
actually the person that they're questioning.
Yeah, so they are offset in time somewhat. The Ketterdam plot line is ahead of the plot line back in Ravka with Lena and Mal. Yeah.
Right. And
Okay.
usually that kind of thing would bother me, but the fact that
Mhm.
they kept his head covered with a sack,
Mhm.
and I can forgive it. I
Yeah.
can forgive it because everything else is so well done.
See, I kind of suspected that, like, I'm gonna pat myself on the back because I suspected it was someone from the skiff pretty early on in the B plot. I was
Hmm.
like, oh, I think this is temporally displaced. Just because everything seems to revolve around the fold. I suspected it was going to link up. I thought it might be Lena or like one of the main characters that had been captured before I saw them physically, at least. So yeah, so back to the army encampment with Mal. Mal is one of the squalls of the Inferni, attempts to seduce Mal at this point,
Yes.
and we now establish that he's super pure of heart because he's only there to get food for Lena and doesn't take the opportunity to sleep with the attractive wizardess. Which I'm going to go ahead and throw this out there. The only reason a soldier wouldn't do that is absolutely true love. Um, like I spent 10 years in the army. The enlisted guys are not going to pass up on that opportunity unless he really, really, really likes Lena and is saving himself for her.
Um, what's interesting about Mal is that I didn't get a sense that there was a lot of romantic action between them. And I have a theory as to why this was done, why
Mhm,
it was handled this way in the book, in the
mhm.
series as well. So I don't know if you want me to get into that.
No, you
Um,
absolutely, totally bring in references from the book. It's fine. I'm interested.
so um, we don't get in the book. We don't get his direct thoughts. All we get is what he tells us by dialogue. So
Mm,
his love for her is not brought in until the very end. Uh,
mm.
so because we don't get this perspective like we do in the series, we're not quite sure what's going on with Mal for most of the book. He just kind of shows
Okay.
up, and that's because it's a single viewpoint book.
Mhm,
Um, but he's like a brother to her.
mhm.
So, you know how kids are up until about the age of 11 when hormones kick in, boys and girls are pretty much on par, sometimes with girls actually being stronger and faster because boys take longer to develop and they grow from this bigger base, which is
Yeah.
why they end bigger usually.
As
So,
I warn my two older daughters about their little brother all the time.
right. So we have this brother sister relationship. And then, of course, the hormones kick in. So we're assuming that at some point when that would happen, they were separated because he's part of a different army unit than she is.
Mhm.
So and we're also going to assume that at an orphanage at some point they're going to separate them out, just
One would
for safe,
hope.
yeah, for safety reasons. So you have this changing dynamic in their relationship from where they go from being brother and sister to being romantically inclined towards each other. And I don't know that you can have that happen without some huge catalyst.
Mhm,
And that's what I think is happening here. So
mhm.
everything that happened in in the first episode and for the rest of the series, it has to happen in order for them to change how they think of each other, because otherwise it is really just like dating your sister.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, creepy.
Yeah. It's like reverse Star Wars, like, since they know ahead of time.
And I
They're
also think that there's something to be said about the audience that ended up reading this book, because there's not a lot of romantic tension in the book
okay,
at any point.
okay.
Because it's I think they might have been, I don't know, they might have been concerned about younger readers, um, reading this, and one of the criticisms that I read about this particular book was that it was a romance for 12-year-olds, meaning that it wasn't really a romance. And actually, I
Mm,
think that's legit criticism. They can't
yeah,
write a romance for 12-year-olds.
yeah.
I mean,
No,
you don't
it
want
would.
your 12-year-old reading. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. No, that's interesting. Um, I don't think to be honest, I don't think I will add the book to my to read list because, as we've already talked about, I'm so far behind. But I do appreciate your perspective from the books. Um, so yeah, we have the Squall attempts to seduce Mal and fails. Mal takes food to Lena when the mess sergeant, the guy dealing out chow, refuses to give her food, which I mean, maybe, but that seems like some NCO or officer in that army would have a problem with the cook deciding who he is or isn't going to feed. Even if they're bigoted, I still don't want my troops starving, even if I am a horrible racist bigot against them. I'm still like, well, I still need them to do their job. Give her gruel and shut up. Like,
But then we won't have a reason for Mal to go to the tent of the
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, the contrivance doesn't work as well for me on that one. Like,
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff that I've pointed out doesn't really bother me, even though I notice it. That one was a little bit like, okay, like, all right, and it's one of those things too, where it's like, if the mess sergeant won't even give her food, shouldn't she be experiencing a little more extreme bigotry in general? Like, it feels like uncalibrated. Like, it feels like people are kind of mean to her, but I don't get the impression from the way it's acted out that she's truly shunned. That's like she doesn't fit in and people are kind of mean to her, but it's not like nobody will talk to her at all. Like, she's not being completely castigated or isolated from everyone. Maybe the book makes that more dramatically apparent, but at least from the series, that's the impression I get.
I don't recall anything in the book being like I don't even think I had the impression that she was an outsider in terms of race from the book.
Okay.
I'm thinking this was contrived for the show because they're trying to work that trope of an
Mm.
outsider, of being the one, of being discriminated against. It's just like any superhero movie, right?
Well, yeah, sort of. I mean, I'm just trying to, like, there are plenty of superheroes who their thing isn't, at least until recent superhero movies, it wasn't really about ethnicity. It was about they're weak and they have to become strong in some way, whether it's physically or mentally or spiritually. Even though that's not, I don't mean in a religious sense. I mean in like a, character sense. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying. And it is, it does seem to creep into just about everything of, oh, does your protagonist face discrimination? No, well, make it to where they do. And it's like, it just felt very, so that would explain, if it's inserted into the series, that would explain why it came across as kind of weird,
Mhm.
and not consistent, like that it was like, oh yeah, we hate you, you're this awful ethnicity we don't like, except we totally accept your presence and most of us will talk to you as an equal, except for this one dude who occasionally says mean things. It just felt very, very Diet Coke of racism. Just 1 calorie.
Yeah. No, and I think that's a fair criticism. It just did not if it's in the book, it did not stand out to me.
Hmm.
Um, and actually, I think it would have ruined a lot of the story for me because it would almost feel like it was overdone.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And like I said, the fact that the Shu are supposed to be ethnically Asian-ish, I guess if I'd known that, that might have cued me in. Although, from my perspective as an American mongrel, like they don't really look like the army doesn't look like it's one ethnicity anyway. It looks like a bunch of vaguely beige and white American and Western European actors. So
Mhm.
I don't even know how they know she's a different ethnicity unless she says something.
I mean, and you're not wrong there. I mean, I having lived in Eastern Europe when I did, I could tell you we had 4 or 5 ethnicities living on our street.
Yeah.
Um, so we could always tell the ethnic Hungarians from the ethnic Bulgarians. I could even tell you what part of Hungary somebody came from based on the face on their
Their
features.
their bone structure, yeah.
Yeah, but it was very nuanced, or
Mhm.
you could tell by their last name,
Mhm.
you know, and so yeah, they don't have the diversity in this that they think that they do.
Yeah, yeah. So like I said, it comes across. It's like, wait a minute, is she though? She kind of looks like the rest of you. like, how do you know she's something else? Like, is there a last name? Do you know? Like, because it's not very, it's not the strongest element of the story. So, but I feel like since as the episode starts drawing to a close, my sarcasm from aside earlier, Lena does manage to ruin all the maps they have to navigate the fold, so that they have to take a cartographer along, which seems, again, maybe a little contrived, but that one didn't bother me. Um,
I think she burned specific maps, so she would get
mhm.
sent across, but I don't think they were maps of the fold because it's so dark in the fold, they just kinda
Oh,
cross
right,
it.
it's the maps of the other side, right?
It's the maps of the other side.
Gotcha.
And,
Yeah.
and you can't think about the fold too hard either, because okay, so my first thought was, "Oh, they're going to sail a wooden ship across sand." Sure, sure. Sparks? Hello?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No, I'm sure there's no way that ship will catch on fire.
no, no way. And then we have the guy that falls out or that runs out from the ship, and he crosses the fold in 2 hours on
Yeah.
foot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes it seem a little less threatening.
Well, I think it's long and tall, but I don't think it's very wide.
Okay. But
Yeah.
still,
Yeah.
like it's this horrible thing and it's so hard to survive, but this guy managed to run through it. It's like, well,
Yeah.
is he super badass in some way? No, he's just some conscript.
No, but we needed it for the story.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
feel like you could have storyboarded that one a little better.
Well,
like mhm,
yeah, the world building sometimes, isn't very, I don't know what you would call it, compliant.
mhm.
I
It's
mean,
very
okay, there's just
convenient. Yeah.
yes, very convenient. Now, maybe there was a magical reason for it, or there's
Mhm.
an explanation in one of the other books as to how he was able to make it across. Maybe the Volcro were busy eating the people on the ship or attacking the people on the ship, or they were weakened um, the burst of light
Magical light.
she
Yeah.
created.
Yeah, because
Um,
that's the big reveal, right? Is that our main character has a type of magic we have not yet seen until now, and that she actually manipulates light. It appears from what I'm looking at.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay. So
and
she's the
that's
luminomancer.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's a power that she has that she doesn't know she has.
Hmm.
Which is another part that I think they handled really well. Typically, this is the thing that I throw books across the room for. Is, she didn't know she was the one.
The
Yeah,
power was inside her all along.
yeah. So this was actually handled quite well, as you'll see as the series goes on, as to
Okay.
why. And in the
Hmm.
book as well,
Hmm.
Bardugo just does a really good job handling it. So she generates this big burst of light that scares away the Volcra, and that's how they end up surviving
Okay.
because she's
Okay.
a
Cool.
sun summoner. So she's the opposite of the
The
person that
Darkling.
created the fold, the Darkling. So
Yeah.
that is her special power, and there's nobody else like her alive on Earth.
Okay. Gotcha. So she's still the chosen one, but it's for a
Yes.
different reason. Yeah.
Hmm.
No, that's interesting. Yeah, I've. It is funny because I feel like there really should be, and this show is not doing that, but it does make me think of the real power was inside you all along, and just believe in yourself harder, and that will solve the issue with with just that. Like, and that's how it's resolved. Like, I feel like there should probably be a moratorium on that. Um,
Well, like I said,
as a
this was
storytelling device.
actually explained well as
Yeah.
to why she didn't know who she was or that she had that power. Um,
Hmm.
it was there's a reason for it.
Gotcha. I look forward to continuing to watch it and
Okay.
figuring that out. So okay, and then so like you said, we end with the reveal that the guy who managed to get off the skiff escapes into the B plot, with our criminal crew, and the even worse criminal that they're trying to get employment with. And they managed to bring the very specialized wizardess, the Heartrender, who's able to soothe him enough to get his story that they're, apparently just, I guess the evil crime boss is trying to get from him that it is possible to cross the fold. If that's what they're is that what he's looking for, or is it the existence of Lena, or what was he trying to get out of him exactly?
He I think he was trying to figure out how or what happened. How
Mm-hmm.
come he ended up on foot, and
Mm-hmm.
then how what happened to get the ship across? Because even though they lost some people, they didn't lose
Mm-hmm.
the entire ship. And I guess that was their expectations, is that once the Volker attack you, they just devastate the ship.
Yeah.
And he had that information that there was this bright burst of light, and the heart render was able to help him recall enough information for them to
Mm-hmm.
conclude that a sun summoner now exists. And this is
Gotcha.
valuable intelligence for the Fjerdans, who I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
assume are like the Finnish people,
That
or
would make sense. Yeah.
the equivalent of of Finland, and they're
Mm-hmm.
enemies of Ravka.
Mm-hmm.
And their mission is to destroy the Grisha, the magical people.
Gotcha.
So this is important because it gives it's intelligence is basically what it is.
Yeah. And then we are quickly treated to the fact that this is not a nice person because he then kills the survivor.
Oh yeah.
Pretty ruthlessly, and Kaz and crew are now morally gray because they go along with it at that point, and they don't immediately, walk out or fight him. So we now have a at least somewhat tarnished. They're not, maybe not accomplices to murder, but they are definitely tolerating murder at this point. Although if fantasy Finland is the enemy of this fantasy Russia, maybe that adds a nuance to it that I didn't pick up on the first time I watched it. If they're fantasy Finland, I'm going to have a hard time not rooting for them because Finland's pretty badass. I'm actually I just well no I have 2 chapters left in Heinlein's Citizen of the Galaxy that I'm reading with the kids, and the Sitsu, the ship where they're all descended from Finns, is a part of that. So that put me in mind of that, which is super fun. Yeah, so we close out. There's a sun summoner back who theoretically should be able to destroy this fold at some point. Although I don't know if that's really the biggest takeaway from the series. We have Mal and Lena in the fold. I think are we introduced to the Darkling, or have I only seen him in trailers so far?
You've only seen him in trailers so far.
Okay. Yeah,
That's
he
the
was the
reason I
bad guy
rewatched.
in Punisher too. Yeah, that actor.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact I have it in my notes. No Darkling in this episode.
Yeah. Okay. Um, and that's kind of where Kaz and crew have the job, and we're set up for going into episode 2. So, like I said, overall, I liked it. I enjoyed the watch. I'll definitely look forward to watching episode 2 and coming back to talk about that. Do you have any notes you wanted to hit that we didn't get a chance to talk about while we were going through kind of the blow by blow?
No, I think you covered it, very well. All the You actually paid more attention to the B plot than I did, to be honest. And this is my
It
third.
was Yeah, it caught my interest. I was like, okay, what's going on here? All right, like, it felt a bit like a distraction, but I was also curious. Like, I was like, I'm torn between. Obviously, the story is about Lena, so why don't we just stick with her? And well, okay, what is going on here? Like, why should I care about these people? So, I don't know that they fully answered that in episode 1, but they kept me interested enough that I'm going to give them another episode or 2 as to why I should care about these people who are not related to what is clearly the primary story yet. Although they are at least tangentially related because of their interaction with the survivor.
There's a lot of things that go on in the B story as the series goes that are just, I don't know, for lack of a better term, charming.
Okay. Okay.
They're just they're just very well done. It's really some excellent storytelling, I think.
Okay. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. So I'll again looking forward to it. Can't wait to watch it more. Um, if you a wrap at that point.
You actually did cut out there, so all I got was the end of that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm going off of Marriott Wi-Fi for this recording, so sorry, folks, if this is interrupted. So I was just saying, if there's if you're not covering anything else, I think we'll call it at that. Folks, if you've liked this video, please like and subscribe, or if you're listening to the audio, consider leaving the podcast a 5-star review on your podcast venue of choice. Thanks so much for spending your time with us. Monalisa, what has released most recently for you, and what do you have coming next in terms of your writing?
So the most recent release has been Book Two Ascension
Hmm.
for Ravages of Honor, and it's available everywhere you can buy books,
Cool.
online or in stores or libraries if you're a library
Nice.
person.
Nice.
And I have on June 7th, so in a couple of weeks, a short story in Robo Soldiers, which is an
Thank you for your
anthology
servos.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for
Yeah.
your servos. Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
cute.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a short story in there called Resilience, um,
Cool.
which is the anthology itself is about augmentations for soldiers,
Hmm.
and my story is a little bit different because I'm not military, but yeah, I have the one kind of like the one off in the entire anthology. But I hope you'll
You
like
do
it.
well. Like you do well when you have to touch on military stuff. I've seen you've now had multiple projects where you've had to touch upon it, and you've always handled it well and respectfully.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, my opinion matters on these things. So yes, you
Yes,
have.
absolutely.
You do a good job. Like I said, Catching the Dark, which I'm going to pitch for you. I know that's not recent, but Catching the Dark is my favorite short piece you've written. I do love both Ravages of Honor novels. I've read them both. Catching the Dark is follows Pilots of the Night Witches, which is in real history was a Soviet female night bomber group, and in your story is an Imperial Russian night bomber group, because the part of the premise of that is that the Russian Empire did not fall at the end of World War One. And it's a very it really it's exciting, and there are you actually do. I know action is not your favorite thing to write, but you do very good aerial combat sequences in that, and that's all the more powerful because you really do have you root it in the personal stakes of our heroine in that story extremely well. So I love that piece of fiction. I've read it several times, and I will post links to that and Mona Lisa's other work in the liner notes below. So if you want to check out Mona Lisa's work, it will be available below.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you for for
Anything
the
else you
praise.
want to mention?
No, that's it. That's all I have coming out here recently or soon.
All right, cool, cool. Thanks so much for spending time with us, guys. See you next time. And until then, keep up the fire.